Welcome to Move with Freedom Yoga. My name is Michelle, and in today's video, I'll be presenting backbends. So I'll do it workshop style, so I'll walk you through how to get into the posture using your own body positioning, or if you need to, we can also use props like a bolster, yoga strap, or yoga blocks. I'll also show you how to get into the posture with modifications using your own body positions, just in case you don't have any props. So if you're ready to go, clear out your space, get on your mat, gather any props that you have, and we can get started. But before we get started, make sure you like this video if you like the content, leave a kind comment, and subscribe. I'd love to have you as part of the Move with Freedom family. Our first posture is Balasana, or child's pose. So child's pose is a great option for when you're in your yoga practice and you need a rest. So it's a resting position, but it also stretches your lower back and actually your whole back, your upper back as well. And you're going to be bending in a more forward position. So to get into child's pose, you're going to come onto your hands and knees. And we can start from hero pose, which is sitting on your heels if that's accessible. If not, you can be on your hands and knees. You'll lower your hips towards your heels, and then bring your head and forehead down towards the floor. And maybe your head can touch the floor. And then back to hero pose or sitting on your heels. If sitting on your heels is a little bit much, you can also do a tall kneeling just on your knees. Another option for child pose, if you can't bring your forehead way down to the floor, is the use of just your own body positioning. So you can take fisted hands, place your stacked fists on the floor, take your forehead down onto the fists, and here you have child's pose. A block is another option for child's pose when your forehead doesn't quite get down to the floor. So you'll take the block on either height. I'll use it on the medium height. I'm going to take my forehead down onto the block. There are certain practitioners of yoga who are not able to maybe come down to the floor in child's pose, maybe because there's some obstruction in the front. So maybe it's a bigger stomach or maybe it's a bigger chest. So in that case, the modification is to have your hips up a little bit higher than in a more traditional child pose. So what I mean by that is I'll start on the hands and knees position, coming down onto the forearms, and then maybe taking the hips backwards. But you can see that I'm able to have a lot of space here between my chest and the floor. So if I was to have maybe a bigger chest or a bigger belly, then I'd be able to accommodate the body, that type of body, and then still get a rest. So my hips are not on my hips are not on my heels. Now, the use of a bolster provides a more restorative position for child's pose. So you would take a bolster, and it could also be a blanket that's rolled up. And I like to start by straddling the bolster. And basically, you're still in the all fours position. And then you're laying over, but it doesn't hurt the brain. You're laying over the bolster. So my knees are bent. I'm going to sit back. So it's the same idea of hips to heels, but you're laying on the bolster. And then take the chest down, head down, and rest. So those are some options for Balasana or child's pose. So the next posture that we're going to be doing is Parighasana, or gate pose. So to get into Parighasana or gate pose, we'll come to a tall kneeling position. And I like to cue hands on the hips, especially if we need stability on the hips. So I'm going to lean to my left side just a little bit to place the weight on my left leg and take the right leg out to the side. So notice that the toes are pointing forwards rather than out to the side. It's coming to the long edge of my mat. I'm going to bring my hands to heart center and then reach the arms up overhead. Imagine that you're holding something in your hand, so you're really energizing those fingers. And then the right hand's going to go lightly to touch the outside knee. Reach the arm up first, and then you're going to come over to the side. Exhaling all the air out so we can really make room for that stretch. Then slide the hands back up towards the hip, bring the arms overhead. And then flexing at the hip, we'll take the hands down to the floor and take the knee together. And I'm going to go to a Virsana or hero pose. So the same thing to the other side. Coming up to a tall kneel. Bringing the hands to the hips at first. Leaning to my right side so that I can free up the left foot. Toe is pointing forwards. Arms come up overhead, energizing the fingers on an inhale. And then over to the left. So the hand that's on the extended leg, you're not pushing down. It's not a very heavy hand. It's a light hand. And then energize that right hand up and then over to the side. So the stretch is from the hip all the way up to the fingers. Imagine that you're going over like a ball or a bolster on this side. You're laying your body on that ball or bolster. And I'm going to slide the hands back up towards the ceiling. Hands come to the floor. Then carefully rebend the knee, bringing the knees together. And I'm going to settle into a child's pose. The next posture in this workshop series is Ustrasana, or camel pose. Camel pose is a big chest opener back bend, and it is more accessible to those who work that opening of the chest. So what we want to think about as you're in this posture, or any chest opening or back bend, is that the shoulder blades come closer together as you're opening up your chest. So I imagine that the shoulder blades are coming to touch at the upper back, and that will allow the chest to open and allow you to open up the back bend. You also have this lengthening of the abdominal area and the mid back. It's like you're going up again over a bolster. So you want to take it up, and your chest opens as your shoulder blades squeeze together. So keeping that in mind, let's go into camel pose. So for camel pose, for camel pose, there may be a fear, any back bend actually, there may be a fear of tilting back, of going back, opening up your throat and being vulnerable to open up the chest. So what I like to do is go into stages, as with any class that I teach, or any posture that I teach. So the first way I teach this posture is to have the heel of the hand to the lower back. So imagine that you're going to place your fingers into a back pocket. And so that way you know that you are supporting your lower back in this back bend of camel pose. So the heel of your hand is going to go to your lower back. Again, imagine that you're placing your fingers into a pocket of your favorite jeans. And then you're going to take your shoulder blades, open them up. But it's not just an opening where you're squeezing the shoulder blades. You're going up and over something. So imagine that there's a ball or something behind you. You're going up and over to lay on that ball. So it's a lot of imagery here. So taking the hands to the lower back for support. Imagine that you're taking your fingers into the back pocket, lifting up and then going back. So it doesn't have to be a huge back bend to get the posture. You don't have to go all the way back. This is a really good starting position. So my shoulder blades are coming closer to each other and I'm going up and over backwards. Now, having this open chest, this open throat might be uncomfortable for some people. So I would advise that you look more forward and focus more on the chest opening rather than the head going back. And then come right out of it and have a seat. All right. So another variation is to have your hands touch your heels. Another variation is to have your hands touch your heels. Now, going backwards again, sometimes there's that fear of falling backwards. So take your time going into the posture. So another recommendation that I have for modifications is to, rather than having the toes on the floor, is to come up to the balls of your feet. That way your heels are higher or closer to your hands and higher off the floor. So the same cue here, hand to the lower back, pretend that you have your hands in your back pocket. This time now you have some stability to your feet. So you're going to push into your feet and then come back looking forward or up. And then use the hands to guide you backwards. So you're going to feel the length of your quadricep lengthen as you go backwards. So it's a little deeper. And then maybe reach one hand for the heel and then the other hand for the heel. So that way you'll be able to open up your chest, squeeze, make a back bend, but also go a little bit deeper into the posture. To come out, one hand at a time, to your lower back, and then up. Uncurl your toes and sit down into your hero pose. Now, once you feel comfortable going backwards in your camel pose, then you can have your toes down onto the mat. So, same cue, starting in a tall kneeling position. Hands support your back to start, guiding the hips forward as your shoulders blades come together in the back, your chest opens, and you're leaning backwards, but in a controlled manner. One at a time, hand at a time reaches for the heels and open up. So you're pushing as much forward as you're leaning back. You're pushing as much forward as you're leaning back. Push forward with the hips and open up the chest. Shoulder blades are touching in the back. Breathe. To come out, one hand at a time to your lower back, and then back up. Camel pose. So next we'll be doing a pose called Salabhasana or Locust pose. This is a belly down position where we're going to open up the back from laying on the floor. It's very reminiscent to a Superman position if you take other forms of fitness where it's a Superman position where you're laying on the floor, your arms are going to be up. So there are a few arm variations, and let me give you an example of each. So let's go ahead and lay on the floor onto your belly. So I'm coming from a hands and knees position, and I'm going to lay down on the floor. So the first variation is to take your hands underneath your chin. And I like this one. So underneath my chin. You can also take one cheek to the one side. And then to the other. and back to center. So we'll keep going and getting more and more involved, advanced. So I'm going to keep my hands underneath my chin, and I'm going to lift up my left leg. So just one leg up. And then down. And then I'll lift the other leg. So initially, don't worry about going high. Just think about lifting the leg. So I'm going to lift this a little bit. If this is where you are, then lift this high. Not worrying about lifting, and then maybe you'll throw yourself out of alignment. Not worry about lifting high. You don't want to throw yourself out of alignment. You want to keep the thigh parallel to the mat as you lift. So I'll show you on this side. Sometimes when we go for the height, we end up rolling to the side. But lift to where your flexibility and strength is, and then you'll get a more even lift. And then come back down. So the same thing with the arms. I'm going to keep the right hand on the floor, and I'm just going to lift or guide the left hand back behind, and I'm going to push using my elbows, push backwards. So my feet stay on the ground, just my arm is towards the back of the room. And then I'll switch to the other side. So this modification requires no props. It's really how you position the body. And then back down. You can also, keeping your arms down, lift both legs at the same time. Again, not worrying about height, just the idea of lifting the legs up off the mat. Think about pushing into your hip bones. And sometimes you might need to bend the knee. I can do, like, so you see people bend the knees like this, or you're really bending the knee and your foot comes up to the ceiling. That's not what the posture is for. It's a straight leg posture. So it's better for, I think, to have one leg and then do the other rather than having both. And then maybe you're looking like this, where your knees are bent. So we want to push into the thighs, push into the hips, and lift, using the gluteal muscles to help you lift up and opening up the chest and the back. And then come back down. So a fuller expression of the pose would be the arms and the legs up at the same time. So laying on the mat, your chin or forehead is going to be on the mat. You're going to guide your hands backwards, pushing into your belly, your hip, and your thighs. Push into the mat as you float everything up, keeping the toes pointed and doing your best to keep your knees close to each other. Sometimes you might have your feet, I'm exaggerating, of course, really far out wide. You want to bring the feet as close together as possible, almost like you have one leg, pushing the hands back behind you and lifting up. So imagine again the shoulder blades in the back squeezing together. And then lower down. Hands by the side and rest. And that pose is Locust pose or Salabhasana. So our next pose is called Bjujangasana or Cobra pose. Cobra pose is very common when you're doing a vinyasa flow, and if you don't want to do your upward facing dog or your Urdhva Mukha Savasana, you do a Cobra pose or Bjujangasana instead. So the upward facing dog or Urdhva Mukha Savasana is having a more extended spine and your knees might lift up off the ground. Whereas with Cobra pose, your knees typically stay on the ground. You still have the same lifted upward spine and back bend, but your knees are typically on the ground. So let's get into it. You're going to lay on your stomach. So a lot of these postures are coming from a prone position or belly down position. So coming onto my hands and knees, I'm gonna lay down on my belly. So right where my hands are, right by the chest, I'm gonna keep them there for this posture. Looking forward towards the short edge of the mat, I'm gonna extend the elbows and lift my chest off the ground. Notice my knees are still on the ground. And I'm looking forward, chest open. And slightly bring my shoulder blades together towards each other at the upper back. So what we don't want to do, and I'm going to show you something that you want to avoid, is to dump into your shoulders. So I'm going to exaggerate, but doing this, right? So that my shoulders are touching towards my ears. And I feel like I have a turtleneck on. What you want to do is elongate by pushing into the hands, elongate the neck, open up, and look forward. The tops of your toes are on the ground, and it's a very strong posture. To come out of it, you'll bend the elbows and lower your body onto the floor. Easy does it. Take your time. This posture is a great way to strengthen your upper back muscles. So another variation would be to stay low on the ground, engaging the belly muscles and the chest, squeezing the shoulder blades together, letting the hands float off of the mat. So this way, my whole upper back is engaged. My belly is pushing down into the floor, so is my hip bones. So are my hip bones, and I'm looking forward, squeezing the shoulder blades together, and then down. And that is how you do Bjujangasana or Cobra pose. Let's move on to our next posture, which is Supta Virsana or Reclined Hero Pose. This one is tricky because it calls for open thighs, or very open thighs, open back, open inner thighs. It can be a lot. So we're going to get into it very carefully. So I'll show you the posture first. I'm going to go the opposite of what I've been doing. I'm going to go to the fuller posture, and then we're going to add the modifications. So start in hero pose. So you're sitting on your heels for Virasana or hero pose. In order to get the most out of the posture, you'll open up move your heels away from each other and sit in between your heels. So you're going to lay down. Your upper back and your head is going to be on the floor. You will notice that there is a space that's going to be at your lower back. So I'm going to lower down. Your heels are very close to your bottom. And then the arms go overhead. Bend the elbow and clasp opposite hands to opposite elbows. Supta Virsana. To come out of the posture, I come onto my elbows and then roll up from there. So now to practice leaning backwards with your bolster, you're going to have the bolster behind you. Your feet are going to go to the outside of the bolster. And you're going to sit down right in front of the bolster. And then from there, you can lay back onto the bolster, taking your time, making sure your head is supported. And we're getting a beautiful stretch to the quadriceps. Opening up the hips even more. Your heels are still close to your bottom. Laying back on the bolster for support. And you could keep your hands at your feet or on the floor. Or if you want to go a little bit further, taking your hands over your head, laying over the bolster. This feels so good. And then bending the elbow, taking one hand, opposite hand to opposite elbows, and sink into this beautiful chest opening back bend. Ah. Don't mind me. I'm just going to be here for a while. I'll be back with the next posture in a second. Fish pose or Mataysana is our next posture. This is also a supine position. So you're going to lay on your back with your knees bent, feet on the floor to start. Oh, and if you have a bun or a ponytail, take it out. So your head is laying on the floor. And I'd like to take my hands underneath my hips for support. Now, you can have your hands by your hips, but I find that when I take my hands underneath my hips, underneath my bottom, it gives me a little bit more support. The next thing I'm going to do is to straighten out my legs. And I'm going to push up onto my elbows and present my chest towards the ceiling, and the top part of my head is going to go on the floor. Now, I want you to, when you're doing this posture, if you need to look at me as I'm doing the posture, I'm going to ask you to come out of the posture, lay flat on your back, and then look at the TV screen. Try not to look at the screen while you are in the fish pose. Try not to look at the screen when you're in the fish pose. You don't want to turn your head when it's in that very vulnerable position. So maybe watch the video all the way through first and then do the position. All right, so again, I'm going to bend my knees. I'm going to place my hands underneath my buttocks. Palms are on the floor. Straighten out the legs. Push into the elbows so that the upper back comes off of the floor and your chest comes towards the ceiling, and then place your head onto the floor. So the top part of your head is on the floor. I'm going to rebend my knees and take one leg at a time up towards the ceiling. And then I'll switch legs. So for just starting out, you can take one leg and also take both legs up. So you can have your feet up towards the ceiling more in a 90-degree angle, or a little bit lower, like 45 degrees or so. And then I'm going to rebend my knees and then come up onto the elbows to clear my head. So I'm lifting my head up so I can lower it down onto the floor. There you have it, a fun back bending video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you were able to access most, if not all, of the postures. Let me know in the comments, what is your favorite back bend and your favorite way to access those postures? Please like and share this video, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Have you just started your yoga journey but don't know where to start? I suggest that you do 5 to 10 sun salutations A, every day in order to get the consistent practice. It just so happens that I made 2 videos, one 5 sun salutations and one 10 sun salutations, and I have linked those classes at the end of this video. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today in this yoga session. I hope that you have an awesome day. And as always, in parting, be well.